A human prisoner sat alone in a reinforced containment chamber aboard the dreadnought of the Scar Dominion, an empire known for its ruthless conquests. The walls of his cell pulsed with a faint blue energy, a precaution against his so-called unpredictable nature. The Scar had captured many species before, dissecting their minds and understanding their weaknesses, but this human was proving to be a peculiar anomaly. High Chancellor Virex observed the prisoner through an observation screen. The human, identified as Ethan Graves, was an ordinary soldier with no remarkable abilities or genetic modifications. Yet, something about him had begun to unsettle the Scar. At first, the guards dismissed the reports, random outbursts of laughter from those who interacted with him, occasional confusion, or minor distractions. But as days passed, incidents escalated. Soldiers assigned to watch him reported disturbing dreams, sudden fits of uncontrollable giggling, and an inability to focus. Some refused to return to their posts. Virex refused to believe one human could be responsible. He ordered a direct interrogation. Ethan sat casually on his cell's single bench when the interrogation unit arrived. 3 elite Scar telepaths surrounded him, their elongated skulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns as they prepared to breach his mind. Ethan smirked. "So what are we doing today, gentlemen? Torture mind probes, maybe a good old-fashioned monologue about how I will break." The lead telepath's glowing eyes darkened as it latched onto Ethan's consciousness. For a moment all was silent. Then the telepath convulsed, shrieking in an unnatural pitch. It stumbled backward, clutching its head. "What did you do?" demanded the second telepath, stepping forward. Ethan just grinned. "I didn't do anything. I just let him take a peek." The second telepath hesitated, but duty demanded it proceed. Its consciousness lanced into Ethan's mind like a scalpel, slicing through memory and perception. But something was wrong. Instead of clear thoughts, structured experiences, and logical memories, it was chaos. Disconnected thoughts, absurd concepts, contradictions, human humor, paradoxes, self-deprecating jokes, absurdist comedy, recursive loops of nonsensical imagery, flying cows, existential crises mixed with slapstick routines, flashes of old Earth internet memes that made no sense to the alien mind. Ethan's thoughts were not bound by order, they were a hurricane of disorder. The telepath screamed, tumbling backward and convulsing on the floor. The third hesitated, but its duty to the Dominion was absolute. It dove into Ethan's mind and was instantly overwhelmed. Virex watched in horror as his finest telepaths collapsed into babbling wrecks, giggling, whispering nonsense, unable to form coherent thoughts. The guards dragged them away as they muttered in broken sentences, trying to grasp concepts beyond their understanding. Ethan leaned back, arms behind his head. "You know, you really should screen your employees better. I'm just a guy who spent too much time on the internet." Virex clenched his clawed fists. The prisoner's mind was not just unreadable, it was toxic. Scar telepathy relied on absorbing patterns, structured intelligence, knowledge bound by rules. Human cognition was a labyrinth of contradictions, sarcasm, humor, and irrationality, anathema to their logical order. Determined to break him, Virex ordered round-the-clock surveillance. The next phase was environmental manipulation. The temperature in Ethan's cell was altered, the gravity was fluctuated, the walls were flooded with subliminal images designed to break lesser minds. Yet Ethan remained unaffected. "What's next? You gonna play elevator music non-stop? If so, I'd like to request something with a bit of jazz." More reports flooded in. The guards monitoring Ethan started displaying erratic behavior. Some chuckled to themselves, others spoke in jumbled syntax, unable to structure sentences properly. One officer tried to explain the problem, but midway through his sentence burst into laughter, unable to remember what he was even saying. Virex felt the first hint of unease. This wasn't resistance. This was something worse. In desperation, he ordered Ethan transferred to a high-security isolation block. But as the transport team moved him, the situation spiraled out of control. The moment he was taken through the central corridor, every Scar in range of his presence felt the effects. Their disciplined minds faltered. Complex orders turned to gibberish. Some fell to the floor laughing uncontrollably, others sat staring at their own hands, unable to process reality properly. Chaos erupted. The ship's systems malfunctioned as affected engineers miscalculated input sequences. Defense grids deactivated, alarms blared on and off in random sequences. The Skara species renowned for their structured, disciplined minds were unraveling. Ethan casually observed the disorder around him. "I swear I haven't done anything yet. You guys are really bad at handling stress." Virex realized with horror that the human was not just resistant to interrogation. His very presence was a weapon. And the madness was only beginning. Virex stood motionless in the command chamber, his claws gripping the armrests of his throne-like seat. Around him, chaos spread like an infection. Officers barked broken orders, their speech deteriorating into nonsensical phrases. Some giggled uncontrollably, others stared at console screens as if they had forgotten what they were supposed to do. A high-ranking strategist had collapsed onto the floor, mumbling something about triangles not existing. The human sat in his containment chair, restrained by energy shackles, yet he looked more amused than concerned. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the sight of an empire's elite forces crumbling under their own inability to comprehend his mind. Virex inhaled sharply, forcing himself to think. The telepaths had failed, interrogation had failed, and now, somehow, his ship itself was falling apart. Reports streamed in, though most were garbled nonsense. Engineers had incorrectly inputted sequences into the main systems. Surveillance officers had stopped monitoring critical sectors. Security protocols had been bypassed by accident because officers had forgotten how to read their own symbols. A deep-seated fear took root in Virex's mind. This was unlike anything the Skar had encountered before. Their entire species relied on strict logical structures, their strength coming from absolute cognitive discipline. Yet this human's very existence was dismantling them. Virex turned to his remaining functional officer. "Get the human off this ship now. Prepare a containment pod and jettison him to the nearest barren world." The officer hesitated, his mandibles twitching. "But High Chancellor, if his presence alone is causing this much disruption, what if?" Virex's fist slammed into the armrest. "I do not care, we cannot allow him to remain. If this continues, the entire ship will fall." The officer nodded shakily and relayed the order. Within minutes, a specialized containment unit was prepared, an airtight pod with a reinforced neural dampening field, meant to suppress any telepathic interference. The problem was transporting the human to it. A squad of elite guards, those least affected, entered the chamber, weapons drawn. Ethan stretched in his seat, looking at them with mild interest. "Oh good, more friends, I was starting to feel lonely." The lead guard stepped forward. "Stand and move." Ethan sighed dramatically. "You know, if you guys just talked to me instead of using your whole creepy brain-melting trick, we could have been best buds." The guards ignored him and activated the restraints. But the moment they moved him, the effects intensified. The closer Ethan got to the rest of the ship, the worse the symptoms became. In the main engineering bay, an entire team of Skar technicians was now laughing hysterically, unable to recall basic operational commands. One had written an entire sequence of numbers on a screen, only to stare at it in horror as if the numbers were taunting him. Another had begun arguing with himself, questioning whether up was still up or if down had replaced it. By the time the guards reached the containment pod, half of them were clutching their heads, muttering fragments of nonsense. One attempted to input the unlock code for the pod but kept entering the wrong sequence. Ethan smirked. "Yeah, that's a tough one, you have to press the buttons in order. See, watch, I'll do it for you." He lifted his restrained hands and mimicked the motion of pressing keys in midair. The struggling guard, now sweating, followed the imaginary sequence, and to the horror of the remaining officers, the pod's controls accepted it. The door slid open. Virex's mind raced. The human had no access to their technology. He had never seen their control systems before. Yet somehow, he had influenced the Skar to make it work through sheer absurdity. Before anyone could react, the containment pod door shut, without Ethan inside. The automated systems locked it down, treating it as a secured prisoner transport. Seconds later, the ship's emergency failsafe activated, launching the empty pod into space. Ethan blinked. Oh well, that was unexpected. The remaining guards stared at the empty launch bay in stunned silence. One started laughing again, unable to stop. Another sat down, eyes vacant, whispering "I don't understand" over and over. Vyrex's claws dug into his palm. The human wasn't just resistant. He was something else. Something they had no defense against. And worse, the madness was spreading. The Scar dreadnought drifted in deep space, its once imposing command structure now reduced to a spiraling disaster. The corridors echoed with laughter, nonsense conversations, and the occasional scream of frustration from those still trying to fight the unraveling of their minds. Vyrex stormed through the ship, his composure barely holding as he passed officers engaged in bizarre behaviors. A high-ranking navigator was arguing with the ship's AI, demanding to know if numbers had feelings. Two security officers were locked in an intense debate about whether silence made a sound. In the medical bay, one of the ship's most esteemed strategists was curled up in a corner, whispering an endless stream of unrelated words. The human was still restrained, still harmlessly sitting in his containment chair. Yet his very presence was infecting the crew's cognitive processes, like a virus bypassing the mind's natural defenses. Vyrex's second-in-command, Officer Ralvek, staggered into the command chamber, looking exhausted. "High Chancellor, we have a crisis." Vyrex's mandibles twitched. "You mean aside from the fact that half our crew has lost their minds?" Ralvek swallowed hard. "It's getting worse, sir. Our latest analysis shows that exposure to the human's thought patterns isn't just causing temporary disruptions, it's rewiring our neural pathways." Vyrex felt his throat tighten. "Explain." Ralvek gestured toward a holoscreen displaying brain scans of affected Scar. "Our species thrives on logical structures. Our thoughts follow disciplined patterns, but prolonged exposure to this human has introduced an entirely new factor into our cognition, a recursive irrationality loop. Some of our crew are now permanently incapable of structured thought." Vyrex stared at the screen in disbelief. This was no longer just a disruption. This was an existential threat. "We have to isolate the human completely. No interaction, no exposure. If this continues, we may never recover." But the damage had already spread too far. The ship's central command hub had been compromised. Systems were failing not due to mechanical errors but because the engineers responsible had lost the ability to process reality in a functional way. A new alert blared through the chamber. "Sir, the jump drive has been activated." Vyrex snapped his head toward the nearest console. "By whom?" The officer manning the station hesitated before pointing to a live feed from the engineering bay. Ethan Graves stood there, still in restraints, surrounded by a group of dazed and delirious Scar engineers. One of them was helping him press buttons. Vyrex's claws dug into his armrests. "How did he get there?" The officer stammered. "Sir, he walked." Security footage confirmed it. The guards assigned to watch Ethan had gradually become too distracted to maintain their post. Eventually, one of them had simply forgotten why they were even there. Ethan had calmly stood up, nodded to himself, and strolled right out of his cell. The worst part was that the crew hadn't stopped him. Those who encountered him either froze, got caught in their own illogical loops, or, in some cases, started following him around like curious children trying to understand an unknowable puzzle. Now, in the engineering bay, Ethan was watching the jump drive controls with interest. "So this button sends us somewhere random, right?" The lead engineer, a formerly brilliant mind and now reduced to barely coherent thoughts, nodded eagerly. "Yes, but only if the spatial anchor is misaligned. If we bypass the primary relay, then." Ethan grinned. "Cool, let's do that." The engineer enthusiastically flipped the switch. Vyrex's eyes widened. "No, no, no." The dreadnought's jump drive activated with an unstable sequence, triggered not by careful calculations but by the fragmented logic of minds broken beyond repair. A shockwave rippled through the ship as the jump initiated, the navigation system failing to lock onto a safe destination. Reality distorted. The stars outside the viewport twisted into chaotic spirals as the ship was flung into the unknown. Virex barely had time to process what was happening before the entire vessel disappeared from its original position, lost in the void of a jump gone horribly wrong. Ethan clapped his hands. Oh man, this is gonna be fun. The Scar dreadnought reappeared in an unknown sector of space, violently shaking as the unstable jump sequence completed. Alarms blared, warning of system failures, but no one was responding properly. Half the crew was too far gone, lost in their own fragmented minds. The rest were still desperately trying to maintain control, but even they were slipping. Virex forced himself to his feet. His vision swam. His thoughts, once razor-sharp and disciplined, felt loose, like a puzzle missing half its pieces. He could still think, still function, but something inside him had cracked. The logical, ordered way he had always processed reality was eroding. The main viewport flickered, revealing a swirling nebula of colors outside. They had jumped deep into an uncharted region. No star maps aligned with their position. There were no known planets, no stations, nothing. Ethan stood casually at the center of the bridge, still in restraints, still completely unfazed. He rocked on his heels, glancing around at the frantic officers who were trying, and failing, to make sense of the situation. So did we win a prize or did we break the universe? Virex's claws scraped against the control panel as he steadied himself. You do not understand what you have done. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Oh, I understand perfectly. You guys kidnapped me, tried to mess with my brain, it didn't work, and now your fancy spaceship is having a little mental breakdown. Ralvex stumbled toward the Chancellor, eyes wide with panic. Sir, navigation is completely unresponsive, the jump drive is fried, our star charts are useless, and he hesitated, looking at Ethan before lowering his voice. And some of the crew are getting worse. Virex's stomach twisted. Worse how? Ralvex swallowed hard. Some of them are forming new behaviors, patterns that make no sense. At first it was just laughter and confusion, but now. A piercing scream cut through the bridge. One of the tactical officers stood frozen at his console, his eyes locked on an empty screen. His mandibles twitched uncontrollably. It's watching me. Virex turned sharply. Who is watching you? The officer shook his head violently. The numbers, they're changing when I'm not looking, I swear they're changing, I can't stop them. Another officer was standing in the corner whispering to himself. The universe is a joke, the joke is the universe, but what if the joke isn't funny? A third had taken off his uniform entirely and was drawing strange symbols on the floor with a plasma stylus. Ethan watched all of this with a fascinated expression. You know, this kinda reminds me of a forum thread I once read, absolute nonsense, but everyone kept going along with it, and before you knew it they had invented an entirely new language just to explain why milk was secretly a government conspiracy. Virex's breathing was ragged. His species had encountered horrors before. Galactic wars. Civil uprisings. The destruction of entire planets. But this was something else entirely. He needed to regain control. Now. He lunged forward, gripping Ethan by the collar. Enough, this is your doing, tell me how to stop it. Ethan didn't resist. He simply looked Virex in the eye, a small smirk playing on his lips. Stop what, the madness or the fact that now you're starting to think like me? Virex stiffened. Ethan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. That's the real problem, isn't it? It's not just your crew, it's you too. Virex recoiled. His mind screamed in protest. He was the High Chancellor of the Scar Dominion, one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. His will was unbreakable. His mind was a fortress. And yet, he was beginning to understand the human's words in ways that terrified him. Thoughts that should have made no sense now had a strange, twisted logic to them. He couldn't let this continue. Ralvex, sir, what do we do? Virex forced his mind to focus. The ship was stranded. The crew was unraveling. The human had to be dealt with immediately. Prepare the escape pod, launch him into the nearest system, we cannot allow him to remain here any longer. Ralvek hesitated but obeyed. Security teams, what was left of them, moved in. Ethan sighed but didn't resist as he was dragged toward the launch bay. As they walked, one of the guards turned to him, blinking rapidly as if struggling to remember how to speak. "What are you?" Ethan chuckled. "Oh buddy, I'm just a guy who had way too much time on the internet and now your entire species has to deal with that." The escape pod door hissed open. The guards shoved him inside, locking it down. The automated systems engaged, calculating the nearest planetary body. Virex stood in the control chamber, his claws trembling as he forced himself to breathe. "Fire the pod now." A loud hiss filled the air as the pod launched into the unknown, carrying Ethan far away from the dreadnought. For the first time in hours, silence fell over the ship. But Virex didn't feel relief. Because deep in the corners of his mind, buried beneath his iron discipline, something new had taken root. And it was laughing. The Scar dreadnought drifted silently through the void, the chaos within it slowly beginning to settle, at least on the surface. The crew, however, was far from normal. Some still wandered the corridors, their eyes glazed, muttering in incomprehensible tones. Others sat in corners, drawing strange, looping symbols on the walls, believing that the ship was a living thing with a will of its own. Virex, standing in the command chamber, could feel the weight of every passing moment. The human was gone, sent to an uncharted world, drifting through the cosmos in an escape pod. But the damage lingered. The madness had seeped so deeply into the ship that even the most composed officers were beginning to question their own sanity. It was subtle at first. A brief lapse in memory. A sudden inability to focus. But these cracks in their mental discipline widened with each passing hour. The Scar had never experienced anything like this. They had conquered civilizations and bent species to their will, but this human's presence, his very way of thinking, had infected them all. Virex couldn't stop thinking about the last words the human had spoken before being launched into the void. "You'll never get rid of it, you know. It's in you now." At first, Virex had dismissed it. The human was nothing more than a source of irritation, one that had caused an inexplicable shift in his crew. But now, with each passing hour, that nagging thought refused to leave him. Was it true? Had the madness truly found a permanent home within him? He had to find out. A sudden beeping from the control panel snapped Virex from his thoughts. The main display flickered, showing the escape pod's trajectory. It had exited the ship's sensors and was now heading toward a small, barren planet, exactly as planned. But something was wrong. The pod's course wasn't stable. Virex leaned forward, claws digging into the console. "What is this?" A technician, still stumbling from the madness, attempted to stabilize the pod's path. But the readings on the screen were nonsensical, anomalies were appearing. It was as if the very fabric of space was reacting to the escape pod's presence. The technician mumbled. The coordinates are fluctuating. It's as if the pod is jumping between realities." Virex's blood ran cold. The human's departure hadn't been the end. He had sent the human to a barren world, but now? The madness didn't go with him, Virex muttered, realization dawning. It followed him. The technician nodded, his voice shaking. It's spreading, High Chancellor. Everywhere we go, it spreads. We can't control it. We've already lost communications with several sectors. And some of the crew," he trailed off, unable to finish. Virex's mind raced. The ship's systems were still malfunctioning. His crew was broken. And the human, Ethan Graves, was now untethered. If the madness had taken root beyond the confines of the ship, there was no telling what would happen next. He turned to Ralvek, who had entered the command chamber, his eyes vacant and distant. "Prepare the remaining fleet. We need to retrieve the pod. We cannot let him remain out there." Ralvek nodded, though his posture was slumped. The once proud officer was now barely functioning, and the sight unsettled Virex. As the remaining fleet ships prepared to launch into the unknown, Virex knew that the Scar had crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. The human's influence, his unpredictability, his chaos, had not only shattered the mind of their crew, but it was now expanding into the very fabric of space itself. The fleet set off, each ship carrying the broken minds of once powerful beings, and Virex knew that they were racing against something far worse than the mere madness of a single prisoner. They were chasing a new kind of virus. One that defied logic. One that was now embedded in the very core of their existence. And somewhere, out there, Ethan Graves was watching it all unfold with a knowing grin. The Scar fleet moved through the black void, fragmented and disjointed. Ships that had once been the pinnacle of military might now glided aimlessly, their commanders struggling to hold on to any semblance of order. The madness from Ethan Graves had continued to spread like a wave crashing across a beach, devouring everything in its path. Each new sector they entered, each new system they approached, seemed to amplify the chaos. Virex sat at the command center of the lead ship, but the quiet hum of the vessel did little to comfort him. His mind, once sharp, once ruthless, was beginning to bend under the strain. Rationality fought against irrational thoughts, and the longer he spent in command, the more distorted his perceptions became. It was as if every decision, every action, was tainted with a veil of confusion. His claws trembled as he gripped the console, trying to focus on the readings from the nearby planet. Ethan's escape pod had landed there, and they were close, too close. The system's once pristine sensors had grown erratic as they approached, every reading flickering in and out of existence. Virex's breath grew shallow. He had no idea what to expect, and they finally retrieved the pod. The fleet dropped out of warp near the planet, and Virex's heart clenched in fear. His crew was barely functioning. Some officers had already abandoned their posts entirely, reduced to mumbling incoherently or simply staring into space. A few had even taken to wandering the halls, convinced they were trapped in an endless loop, unable to find a way out. Ralvek entered the command chamber, his eyes bloodshot, his movements sluggish. "Sir, the surface scans show anomalies. We cannot land the fleet in close proximity. The planet's atmosphere is reacting to something we can't understand." Virex closed his eyes, his mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts at once. "The madness, it's here, isn't it?" Ralvek nodded. "Yes. It's as if the planet itself has been infected. Our technology is failing, High Chancellor. The gravity wells are shifting, the magnetic fields are erratic. This place, it's alive, but in a way we don't understand. And it's spreading." Virex's claws dug into his palm. They had no choice. If they did not retrieve the pod now, the madness would only continue to spread across the galaxy. He had to act fast. "Prepare an extraction team," Virex ordered, his voice harder than he felt. "We're going down. We retrieve the human, and we leave. The rest of the fleet will remain in orbit." Ralvek hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Understood, High Chancellor." As the extraction team prepared to leave the ship, Virex felt a strange sense of dread settle into his chest. He couldn't explain it. It wasn't fear of the human, nor the planet. It was something deeper. Something creeping at the edges of his mind, whispering that there was no escape, that the madness had already claimed him. A transport shuttle descended toward the planet's surface, carrying Virex, Ralvek, and the few soldiers who were still functional enough to accompany them. As they passed through the atmosphere, the chaos below became more apparent. The landscape was warped, the sky twisted into unnatural patterns, like a distorted reflection of reality itself. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, and the moment the doors opened, Virex felt the full force of the madness that had taken root on the planet. His crew staggered as they exited, some clutching their heads in pain, others simply staring in awe at the bizarre, ever-shifting terrain. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Ethan Graves. He was alone, sitting cross-legged in the center of a large, glowing circle, his restraints long gone. His expression was one of serene amusement, as if he were completely at ease in a place that was anything but. He looked up at Virex, his eyes glinting with an unsettling clarity. "Welcome to the party," Ethan said, his voice light and casual. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Virex's vision blurred, the words echoing in his mind, but not quite making sense. He took a step forward, his thoughts fragmented. "What have you done?" Ethan shrugged. "Oh, nothing. Just gave your species a little taste of how reality can be. You guys always thought you were in control, right? But you're not. You never were." Virex's heart pounded. He felt the ground beneath him pulse, as if the very planet was alive, breathing. He reached out to grab Ethan by the collar, but his hands trembled, his grip weak. Ethan stood up and smiled. "You still don't get it, do you? You can't escape this. It's inside you now, all of you. Just like me." The sky above them rippled, and the world seemed to stretch, the air thick with a palpable distortion. Virex could feel his mind starting to unravel. The madness was no longer just a contagion, it had become an environment, a part of the very fabric of existence. Ralvek, standing next to Virex, muttered to himself, his voice barely coherent. "It's in the air, in the ground, in the stars. I can feel it." Virex's claws clenched, but he couldn't pull himself together. He looked back at the planet, at Ethan, who was standing there with a look of quiet satisfaction. "We're all connected now," Ethan said, his smile widening. "There's no going back. This is the new reality." The ground beneath them cracked, and Virex felt the last remnants of his rational mind dissolve into the madness, just as Ethan had predicted. He could no longer separate himself from it, no longer fight it. The Scar fleet, the Empire, the once great civilization, all of it was fading into oblivion. They were no longer conquerors of the galaxy. They were simply part of the chaos, lost in the madness Ethan had unleashed. And somewhere, out in the darkness, a quiet laugh echoed, growing louder, as if the universe itself had joined in. The Scar fleet remained suspended in the void, their ships now little more than drifting husks of their former selves. The once mighty war machines that had swept across the galaxy in search of conquest were now adrift in a cosmic sea of madness. Inside their hulls, the crew, those few who were still conscious, were consumed by their fractured minds. They no longer moved with purpose, they wandered, babbling incoherently, caught in an endless loop of illogical thoughts. But it was not just the ship that had been broken. The very fabric of space itself seemed to have been warped, twisted by the same madness that had consumed the Scar. The stars outside the viewport flickered erratically, and the once perfect systems of the fleet now sputtered like the dying breath of a long-forgotten civilization. The planet where Ethan Graves had been left, had he truly been abandoned? Or was he the one in control now? Virex, the once unshakable High Chancellor, stood on the bridge of the lead ship, his body shaking uncontrollably. His once iron will had shattered, the last fragments of his clarity consumed by the chaos that had enveloped him. He could hear it now, that whispering laugh in the back of his mind. The madness, the illogical thoughts, the twisted reality, it was all around him. And it was inside him. He had thought that by sending Ethan away, he could regain control, restore order to his people. But now, he knew better. The humans' influence was far more insidious than any of them could have imagined. It wasn't just about madness, it was about something deeper, something far more fundamental. It was as if the universe itself was broken, and Ethan had found the fracture. Now, the galaxy was falling apart at the seams. The Scar were no longer conquerors, they were victims of a new order, a new reality. Virex stumbled to his command chair, his vision blurring as the ship's systems continued to fail around him. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to take control once more. But there was nothing left. His mind had broken just like his crew's, just like the ship's systems. The madness had infected everything. Even now, the ship seemed to laugh at him, its mechanical heartbeat distorted and out of sync. The laughter grew louder, more pervasive, until it was no longer just in his mind. It filled the air around him, twisting his thoughts, drowning him in its endless, maddening echoes. And then, through the chaos, a voice broke through. "You've learned the hard way, haven't you?" Virex turned, his vision flickering. Ethan stood at the doorway of the bridge, his expression calm, almost serene. His clothes were torn, his face dirty, but there was something unsettlingly confident in his posture. He stepped forward, the air around him vibrating with a strange energy. "I thought you might have figured it out by now," Ethan continued, his voice carrying a detached amusement. "But I guess it takes some time to accept the truth." Virex could barely focus on the human as he approached. His mind was slipping further and further, but one thing remained clear: Ethan was here, standing before him as if he had always been a part of this reality, a part of this madness. The human crouched down, staring into Virex's eyes with an eerie intensity. "You can't fix this, Virex. You never could. You never had control. This is the way of things now." Virex wanted to scream, to lash out, but his body refused to obey. He could feel his consciousness fracturing, his thoughts scattering like shards of glass. He was drowning, slipping into the abyss that Ethan had opened. There was no escape. Ethan stood up, stepping back with a casual grace. "You know, I didn't really mean for it to go this far. But the moment you let me in, the moment you tried to understand my mind, you sealed your fate." The chaos in Virex's mind flared. What have you done to us?" Ethan smirked. "What have I done? Nothing, really. I just showed you a different way of thinking. A way that has no rules, no boundaries. You were so certain of your order, your control. But you were never as powerful as you thought. Not compared to the truth I've introduced. To the reality that's been here all along, waiting for someone to find it." Virex collapsed to his knees, his mind splintering into 1,000 pieces. The galaxy, the Empire, his very existence, all of it was meaningless in the face of the truth Ethan had revealed. There was no order. There was no control. There was only chaos, a universe of endless possibilities with no foundation to stand on. Ethan's laugh echoed in Virex's fractured mind, and for the first time, he understood. The human had not driven them to madness. He had merely shown them the truth. And in that truth, they were lost forever. The Scar dreadnought, its once mighty fleet, its emperor, all of it drifted aimlessly in the dark void. There was no point in trying to rebuild. There was no point in trying to fight. The universe had been remade in a single, chaotic moment. And the madness would endure, spreading beyond the stars, beyond reason, beyond the very essence of reality itself. And as the last remnants of the Scar faded into oblivion, Ethan Graves watched from afar, smiling. He had won.